Okay, thanks everybody for joining today's presentation. I'm real happy to introduce Jim Eaton. I think your name was Miller. Yeah.
Miller.
Okay, that's your wife's name, Bennett. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us, Jim. And why don't you go ahead and get started? We're going to be talking about your wonderful house, which is includes some amazing murals that you have created. So.
And I would just like to remind the general public that this is, there's a 3D scan of the home. If you'd like to see the mosaics up close and in person, there's a link on this post on the website where you can view a 3D scan of the house and have a virtual tour.
Hold on. We've
had our first follow-up. There we go. No, we don't want to get it. We want to. There we go.
And let's start from the beginning.
All right. Let's start with the beginning.
There we go.
Anyway,
Oh,
oops.
there we go.
There we go. Okay. So that's it. I can start on my own.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks. This is not going to be a particularly autobiographical presentation, but to some extent, I suppose it has to be. I started working in this field years ago, and the roots of my interest were, first of all, the fact that I've spent my entire career teaching history, and my historical area of research is the Mediterranean. Therefore, over the years, we passed through an awful lot of areas that are associated with mosaics, and I never lost an opportunity to check them out as we were passing through. The second is a kind of more personal experience, and that is after about 5 years of taking care of my parents in their declining years, they died, and I needed something to get my mind off the experience I'd been through. And this was a good one because it required lots of physical labor, but not a heck of a lot of thinking. So it worked out very well. And the third thing was that at this point in my life, having spent about 20 years rebuilding the basics of the house, it was time to decorate. And decorating with mosaic seemed to me to be kind of personally kind of rewarding. So all of these features affected what happened. In any case, what are the basics of mosaicing? And you start off, I suppose, naturally with tools. Mosaicing to a great extent is about taking materials and hacking them up. You cut them up, you smash them with a hammer, you just generally work your material over until you're ready to implant it. So this is kind of a collection of my own personal tools. And this is a larger collection of materials that are normally used in mosaicing. I point out, if I've got the pointer, and I don't think I do.
No, you don't have a pointer.
I don't have a pointer.
No.
I point out the hammer, which is used on stones. And there is somewhere in this collection a smaller instrument which is used to cut glass. So these are kind of your basic tools in mosaic making. These are some of the types of mosaic glass we work with. The larger sheets are what they call play glass, and it's generally a piece of glass that's about 2 feet by 4 feet, which you can then cut down, or you can go to your friendly local glass store and have them cut it. And normally they sell it in one by one, 1 by 2, 2 by 2, something like that size of sheets. But it's more advantageous to get a large section. On top of that are some individual tesserae or pieces of mosaic tile that I've acquired over the years. This is a better picture of the kind of tesserae I'm talking about. The ones in the north, to the north of the screen, excuse me, are whoops, there we go, are basically gold, although they don't look terribly gold in this picture. The other types are more standard glass tesserae. The advantage of glass over stone is that the color patterns are much easier. You have probably 50 to 60 different color patterns in stone, and you can have thousands in glass. And in fact, most of my glass is bought from the Venetians, and they just produce endless variations of the same color, which are kind of fun to work with. So you have then your basic tools, you have your glass, and you're off. This is a pretty good example of the color patterns that you can create with mosaicing. This particular thing is from a Jewish house of worship in New York City that one of my predecessors created. But as you can see, she uses a lot of different color in it. Marble is, you can see just the basic use of marble pieces here, where you use contrasting colors to get what you want. That is to say, to take an area, form the area, and create something of a pattern. This, by the way, is the first thing I ever did. This was a floor that I did on our passage between our kitchen and our dining room. And this was a kind of an interesting project because at that point I had no experience and had no tools. So there were some limits to what I could do. I was just basically taking colors and attempting to create something that would be square and would cover the area. But it turned out to be a nice pattern. This is a more complicated floor mosaic, which I did downstairs. What I was aiming for here, more or less, was to try out just about every kind of pattern I had been experiencing and just sort of put them together. And this is one of the nice parts about mosaicing. That is to say, you design your own designs, you mess with your own patterns, you improve your work as you go along. And so this was quite satisfactory also. Mosaicing can also be done in addition to using glass or using stone. It can be done with a whole variety of other for lack of another term, shard. And this is a wall that I did. It's inspired by Gaudi, the great Spanish or perhaps better Catalan artist. But in fact, the title of this is Inner Gaudi meets Inner Klimt. But in any case, this conglomeration nicely covered up a problem with our downstairs area. That is to say, the wall was made out of cinder blocks, and I wanted to cover it with something. So this became my objective, and the shard was just available. I mean, everybody breaks things, and I've been carefully saving everything that we broken for just such a purpose. So these are kind of the things you can do with mosaics. This is a door which I created for a storage area in the kitchen. This is another storage area in the dining room. Then, of course, there's ceilings. This is a much more complex process, as you will see. This is the National Academy of Sciences. And it was done by a lady named, I'm going to probably mispronounce her name, but it's Maiere, M-A-I-E-R-E, who was a major mosaicist of the early 20th century and did a variety of state capitals and other buildings. She has extraordinary color patterns. In fact, the pattern I chose just to illustrate colors was, in fact, from one of her pieces of work. Quite a modern mosaicist. And again, this is kind of interesting because mosaic has come in and out. It obviously was very popular in ancient times. We had a mosaic situation, mosaics developed in the Byzantine era in Greece, and we had a revival of mosaic work in the last couple of centuries, in between which it went out of favor and then came back in. This is another storage area. I think I got this one wrong, don't I? Yeah, there we go. This is the ceiling of our house, which I rather liked. This is, I had a problem. I had a ceiling which happens quite frequently, unfortunately, in our house. I had a ceiling problem, which was caused by a leak, and a large leak. And so we were in the position of having a bedroom with a big hole in it.
With your
So,
legs sticking out of it.
with my legs sticking out of it, right? So my wife told me to go ahead and do something with the ceiling, and this was what I did. This is a better picture of the problem I had, which was that the fan was hanging not in the center, but off center. So what was I to do? Well, I decided that I would do this paddles, this sort of paddle mosaic, and then put a couple more paddles in and a couple more circulars in, and try to sort of distract your attention from the fact that this thing was not absolutely centered, and it seemed to work pretty well. This was the construction itself. What we did was put rails into the ceiling about every foot or two, and then put 2x2 squares of wood, a 1/4-inch wood, and put the mosaic on top. So it took about 3 to 4 months to actually do all the preparations and put the things up and so forth. But once it got going, it was relatively a simple project. So at any rate, and here's a slightly more complex project, which was a coffered ceiling in the living room. Again, we had problems with the leaky pipes. The pipes themselves were not leaking, but they were sweating, and they drop right onto the ceiling, and therefore damage, not so much damage, but discolor the ceiling. So I decided that we would put in a second ceiling about 1 inch or 1.5 inches lower than the original ceiling. And when I finished the actual coffering work, then I put this mosaic in to serve as a centerpiece. And again, the inevitable problem which you face with any kind of project like this, and that is there's electrical issues. We need lights, otherwise people won't admire the coffered ceiling. So there you go. A little bit of history of the mosaic itself. The mosaics are a Greek invention, and they seem to have begun about the 4th and 5th century. And for reasons that are not entirely clear, they were more likely to be found in Macedonia than in any other part of Greece. The Greeks limited themselves pretty much to using pebbles, and the basic style of mosaic, however, didn't change very much. That is to say, you needed some kind of mastic to hold it down. You used the pebbles, which were small, because it's much easier to work with small pieces of whatever, glass or metal or whatever. And then it's mostly a matter of a design and kind of working your way around the design and figuring out what it is that you really want to do. In any case, this particular mosaic was not found in Greece. It was found in Etruria, that is to say in Tuscany. It's the 4th century before Christ. And it indicates a couple of things. First of all, that the Etruscans, who had a real love for things Greek, that doesn't mean necessarily a real love for Greeks, but they worked with a lot of different techniques that the Greeks introduced into Italy, into what's called Magna Graecia. That is the southern half of Italy, which was colonized by the Greeks. This stuff moved north and was picked up by the Etruscans, who were either using Greek labor to do this, which is quite possible, or were themselves interested in doing it. But in any case, this is a rather complex piece of work, 4th century BC. And the reason I'm introducing that and spending some time on it is that it's from the Etruscans, I think. We haven't got any real proof of this, but it seems to be the case that the Romans got into mosaicing, and the Romans would dominate mosaicing for about 600 or 700 years as the Roman Empire expanded throughout the Mediterranean. This particular style of work sort of passed its way to throughout the empire, so that it's quite likely that you'll find mosaic work in Turkey or Syria or Spain or Portugal or virtually North Africa, virtually anywhere in the area that the Romans conquered and administered for centuries. The Romans themselves were quite good at this sort of stuff. And here's a perfect example of this. This is probably around the 3rd century. It's a gentleman. We don't know very much anything, in fact, about him, but nonetheless, he's notable for their ability to express in his face his humanity, and also he's 3-dimensional. You can look at him and see, gosh, there's a real human being back there. So the Romans really developed this technique, and they used largely stone on the floor. The Romans were not as likely to use glass. They did not do as much wall work as their later successors, the Byzantines, but tended to use mosaic techniques on the floor. And the results, of course, are that the floors are particularly long-lasting in Roman ruins. It's interesting, though, that it's developed about the same time as the Greeks and the Romans developed painting as we understand it, that is to say, 3-dimensional painting. So the mosaic then was very much a critical part of Roman culture. This then passes me to this period of transition, which took place throughout the Greco-Roman world. The skill of mosaicists working in the 4th and 5th century generally declined, but the one exception to this, and sort of the world capital of mosaicing, is Ravenna, Italy, where the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, was collapsing. This capital was actually moved physically from Rome to Ravenna, and a lot of money and a lot of talent was brought into the area. And the result is some of the finest mosaicing you've ever seen. This has been an attraction for artists ever since, not simply mosaicists, but also painters. In fact, probably my favorite painter, Gustav Klimt, who lived from about the late 19th century to about 1920, 25, spent a considerable part of his travel time in Ravenna studying the mosaics and adapted them to his painting. So his painting quite often resembles mosaic work. In any case, this is also indicative of the change of culture. The fact that you have birds in a wading pool, which to us might not seem terribly important, was Christian symbology. And although I'm not sure quite what the symbol is, nonetheless, you have this. This is a not very good picture of another kind of mosaicing that took place in Ravenna, and that is church mosaicing. And I wanted to show this because you can see a kind of a progression. Christ is on the left-hand side, and then presumably a couple of angels, and then a group of females who are probably singing and chanting and so forth and so on the side of a church wall. Klimt again went to Ravenna, and here's what he discovered, that he could do something very similar, except he replaced the Christ figure with a man embracing a woman, and then had a large number of folks out there who I don't know exactly what they're doing, perhaps singing, but in any case, very similar kind of inspiration from 2,000 years earlier to a reasonably modern artist. Ravenna was also the capital, in addition to there being the capital of the Roman Empire in the West. When the Roman Empire collapsed, then the Byzantines moved in, and this is probably the most singularly famous mosaic of all times. This is the Emperor Justinian, about 525 AD, with his various and sundry lieutenants in a church, San Vitale, celebrating, presumably celebrating Mass, but certainly celebrating his own greatness. Justinian's in the Byzantine world worked hard at mosaicing, and this is kind of the nicest example of what you might call frontality. That is to say, as the Byzantines developed the mosaic, they lost interest in three-dimensional work, and for reasons of religion, wanted you to focus on the face of the individual and also the hands of the individual. As you can see, they don't really have a great control over hands. And hands actually are quite a problem, I think, for all artists, but particularly for mosaicists. So this, in any case, is later 6th century, when the Byzantine style had kind of conquered the Eastern Roman world, or Western Roman world as well. And this is some saint. The collapse of the Roman Empire, of course, brought an end to mosaicing in the West, because there simply wasn't very much money and not very much talent there. And when the Byzantines returned to Western Europe in the 9th century, they brought with them their mosaicing skills. And this is a couple of pieces from the 9th century church in, I'm going to forget what it's called. It's the place we stay at.
You mean?
Torcello.
Torcello,
which is an island to the north of what's now Venice. But at the time, the 7th, 8th, and 9th century, was basically the regional capital, and more importantly, the regional center of the church was the Archbishop's establishment. His church was there. So a lot of money was poured into Santa Maria Assunta, which was the official church of the Archbishop, in Torcello, which, by the way, should still be visited. It's an extraordinarily beautiful island, about 45 minutes by Vaporetto to the north of Venice. This is one of the pieces that shows very strongly the Byzantine influence. Again, it's very frontal state. This is a second piece which I adore, which is the back of the church. And as you can see, the mosaicists went crazy and did what's essentially a commentary on the resurrection and the fate of all the souls, some of whom go to heaven, some of whom go to hell. But in any case, it's a kind of a statement of Christology and Christian faith. And now
changing.
we're changing the mode a little bit. In addition to doing floors and so forth that are basically geometric, I think most mosaicists want to move on. And the next two steps, as far as my own personal experience, is first you do critters and then you do people. And this was our dog, who unfortunately has passed away, but who was a terrific little guy. So this was the first stage of building a mosaic of your friendly local dog. And I think you can see first of all, it's cut glass, and that had a lot of advantages, not the least of which was if we're going to ship it back from where I was doing my work, which was Venice. It was good to have lighter weight glass rather than heavier weight stone. But in any case, this is the first. This is the second. So you square your position, you put your dog in, or your people, or whatever, your person, or whatever, and then you do backgrounding. In this case, it was relatively simple backgrounding because dogs, certainly our dogs, tend to do most of their sitting on grass, or maybe on our couch. But in any case, one or the other. And behind it is actually my first effort, I think my first major effort at doing my wife. But unfortunately, this particular picture covers her up with a piece of plastic. So this is an earlier effort to do my wife, who's a very lovely lady. The number of mistakes I made on this are quite extraordinary, but she still likes it. Essentially, I gave her a very long chin, which she doesn't have. But you try and you work at it, and before long, this was kind of interesting. This is an inversion. This is the back side, the underside of the portrait of my wife, which looks absolutely nothing like her, but it has a certain charm all of its own. This is kind of the things you discover as you go along. This is more or less a collection of more developed artwork that I've done, again, on human portraiture and female portraiture, because I like women, I guess is the best way of putting it. So we have here a borrowed Klimt. As I said, I'm an enormous fan of Klimt, and since I could never afford an actual Klimt, I decided I'd do my own. This is my darling wife, who I'm not sure, it's just sort of the blonde. This is I think the thing that always has fascinated me about my wife is the fact that she's a natural blonde, and she changed colors every 6 or 8 months. That is to say, she evolved. So this is called Evolution of the Blonde Stages, 5 stages of 10, which shows her as she marched through her 20s, her hair color changing constantly. It's just a matter of fascination. Let's go back 1, maybe 2, oops, 1. This is my wife as she presently exists. That is to say, the glamour puss whose hair is now natural. I finally conquered, I think that's the point, I finally conquered dealing with the platinum blonde. It took a long time to figure out how to do it, but nonetheless, it worked. And this is, again, sort of 2 more pictures of the same thing. I also practiced on other people besides my wife. This is Alex Katz, one of our major American artists, from whom you could learn a good deal. And one of the things I learned from him was minimalism in terms of shading. This lady, I'm not sure exactly who she was, but as you can see, Katz essentially uses basically your colors of your face and skin, color of your hair, and just a little bit of shading down here to indicate that where the sun was coming from. But she's rather a charming character too. This is one that I got caught up on TV because of the lady's red hair. In any case, this is an actress, British actress, whose name I'm going to forget, who played Lucrezia Borgia in the Borgia series on TV, and I can't remember what her name was. Do you remember?
I don't.
Okay.
No.
And this is to show you how a mosaic comes into being. Again, the technique of mosaic making. This In this case, I had started the mosaic in Italy, and the lady in question, or my instructor, told me that I was pretty good and that I shouldn't waste my time trying to be naturalist, that I should try to sort of develop a new style and use different colors. And when I finished with her face, I concluded that she looked like a character out of 2001: A Space Odyssey or something, and it didn't make any sense. So I ripped out all of the coverings, and what you see here is some skin color that more or less represented her actual skin and eyes and so forth, lips. And then I redid it as Mr. Klimt did it originally. And I'm very pleased with this because, as I said, it saved me a lot of money. But this is as good a copy of a Klimt as I'm probably able to produce even now. These are some of the other things which we've done over the years with mosaic. This is taken from a Gaudi window. But we didn't need a window. What we needed was a clock. So I took Gaudi's design and then imposed upon it a clock, and it seems to work pretty well. This is a Klimt chair. Again, is a case of a lot of my projects. We had a problem. The cat was destroying the back of our chairs. So we decided that since we couldn't maintain the chairs in any kind of appreciable order, we'd go ahead and mosaic them and obviously leave the seat itself with something you could sort of put your tush into. So this is borrowing from one of Klimt's designs. This is I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's part of the decorations of our kitchen. In Vino Vino Veritas, which we're all familiar with, et Optimus Sanus. In wine, you have the truth, but you also have good health. So just a small indication of how crazy things are around our house. This is another mosaic creation of mine, which combines stone with glass, the glass doors and the stone top, which I think worked out pretty well. This is probably my favorite of all of the things I've done, which was a starburst in the living room. And this is all done in glass, and it's kind of a combination of styles, since he uses a lot of gold, which would be a Byzantine kind of a creation, together with just an explosion of colors on the inside. This has been hanging there since 2006 without any problems whatsoever. So the one thing I'm happy to say is that my mastic works very well. Also, this thing reminds me on a daily basis of Dante, because those of you who are familiar with the Divine Comedy will remember that all three sections of the comedy, the Inferno, the Purgatory, and Paradiso, end with the poet looking to the stars. And let's see what else we have here. Oh, and this thing, well, I don't know. This is an arabesque, which somebody showed me a picture of. I turned it upside down and put it in the back of a chair. This again was to prevent the cat from doing any damage. And this, which is the same guiding principle, was done on the basis of a floor mosaic that I saw at the Byzantine Museum in what is it called? the place in Georgetown,
Oh, Dumbarton.
Dunbarton Oaks, yeah.
Mm.
So you can find your inspiration where you want. The second half of this is sort of Imperial Roman. This is the interior of our transept in the entranceway to our house, which I think came out fairly well.
Mhm.
This is Miss Portugal. And Miss Portugal is a longtime interest of mine. The Portuguese took from the mosaicists the idea of creating large mosaic-like figures, which are then slapped on the sides of their buildings in the 17th and 18th century. This young lady, who's about 20-some years old and has a glorious figure, you can tell from her waist, had to be given something, first of all, we had a problem with the word. I just fell in love with it, but we brought it home and we had to figure some place to put it. And eventually we decided to put it in the hallway between our kitchen and our kitchen and the dining room. I tried to give this thing some depth, and the result was the use of mosaic and tile down here to support it and to give you some sense of what was going on. And as you can see, this is the site of my first mosaic also. So by this time, I'd kind of gone full force and was doing everything I could to build this place up. And so in addition to that, I did glass cuts of birds and put them up top together with a laurel, I guess you'd call it, just to give it some color and to give it some change of look. And the result has been pretty positive. I mean, if you don't mind walking into a room and seeing a full-size lady, it's not bad. And I think that's everything we've got. So I hope I didn't overrun my time.
No, not at all.
All right.
That was wonderful. If anybody on the call, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Sorry for my clock chiming in the background.
Jim, do you have a preference, like if you didn't have any other consideration except just your pleasure in working with the material, would you choose stone, glass, or ceramic?
Oh, I'd choose glass. Glass can be cut into such small pieces. And one of the things I've learned in my 20 or so years of doing this is that glass, if smalled down, if cut into small sections, is extraordinarily durable and also gives you a lot more color. So you have a lot of patterns you can work with, and you can more or less shape the thing to be very realistic. And that, I think, for me personally, is one of the things I'm most interested in. I love doing my wife as she looks rather than as I might initially have thought she looked. So it's been kind of a challenge to try to get her as accurate as possible. And glass has worked very well.
I've sort of a follow-up question to that. When you get the glass panes or sheets, is there like naturally slight variations in the color within the glass? Or like when you're making the mosaics, do you intentionally use slightly different shades of the same color to sort of enrich the background?
You do both. There is flat glass, which is what I showed, which is just white, which is a single color, and it's very it's normal. That is to say, the sheet looks the same from top to bottom. But most display glass that you buy is in fact a mixture of colors. So that you get, if you buy a blue sheet, for example, you're likely to get dark blue, light blue, and so forth, all intermixed. And then what you do is you cut it up and you reestablish it or maneuver it onto the walls to meet your fancy. And it works very well. I didn't show what I could have shown if I'd been a little smarter. I could have shown you an example of that, which would have been the backing that I did on the hutch in our kitchen, where I created. I'm a big Venetian. I created a kind of a total picture of the city of Venice. With the sail, with the sea in front, and then as you work your way up the various planks, then you get to see a different style of Venetian, and then eventually you end up with blue, light blue sky. So you can do all sorts of things, depending on what kind of glass you use.
So I'm sorry to be hogging this, but I do have another question. Like that mosaic from, I can't remember it. It was really old. It was of a man with a beard.
Yeah.
Was that glass?
No, that was stone.
Okay.
And that was, by the way, that's a very good point, because whoever did that was obviously extraordinarily talented. I should say that most of the time that the Romans and the Byzantines and the Venetians too were doing this kind of stuff, because the Venetians picked it up. And if you want to go to St. Mark's, it's virtually all mosaiced. They developed teams that worked on this project. Normally you had a 3 or 4 man team, one of whom was the junior guy who cut the stone or cut the glass, and then a couple of other guys who installed it, and then an old guy, with a beard and so forth, who sat in the background and gave them instructions, kind of pulled together the whole thing, probably drew a chalk or crayon or whatever they used, probably drew it on the floor and had everybody else work on it while he presumably drank his tea and watched it. Clearly this was the best job, but he was the master mosaicist. And in Venice, the mosaicists were free men. In ancient times, they were largely slaves, with the senior slave who figured things out.
I think this is my last question. Like using that, like that period of mosaic, how thick were the tessera? Like, are they really like thin little pieces sort of on top of the mastic or whatever, or are they thicker?
They're thicker, generally. The glass tesserae are made a special way, or I'm sorry, the gold tesserae, with actually a sheet of very thin gold stuck into the glass and then fused into the glass. And they're kind of like, maybe a quarter of an inch deep. The tesserae themselves are usually about 3/8 of an inch, I'd say, thick. And about an inch or so long. But that's when you grab your tools and start breaking them up. You can, as you saw actually with the dog, you can use these things with the minimum of cutting to create skin or fur or whatever. But if you're doing a human, then you want smaller pieces, and you want the pieces sort of obviously to fit together. It just simply makes it more realistic, makes it more lifelike.
Thank you.
Sure.
A question. What do you use to adhere the pieces of the mosaic onto their background? And do you use different?
Okay, I use glue, which is to say, the stuff, I forgot what it's actually called.
It's
It's,
just fragrance, right?
I get it at Frager's, yeah, it's just the stuff you use to, when you put,
Windows and stuff?
windows in, yeah, it's the stuff that goes on the outside of the window or the inside of the window to seal it. It's remarkable because the technology is so advanced now that this stuff, it breathes and it adheres, and at the same time it allows for the expansion and contraction of the mosaic itself. So when it gets hot or when it gets cold or whatever, the mosaic stays the same size. It just works very well. They also have various kinds of mastic that's used, which they sell, which are specially designed for mosaic making. But I'm not really convinced that it does a better job. So I prefer, it's also cheaper to use them. And it's lasted. I mean, we've got stuff in the ceiling that's been up for almost 20 years without any difficulty. So it works.
After you have done your mosaic, do you ever grout it to fill the little spaces?
It depends on what I'm doing. If it's a human, if it's a portraiture mosaic, no. If there's some reason to do it, I'll grout it. And for example, on the example that I showed of the young ladies' feet, where I put stuff in there, grouting was useful because it gave you more the sense of depth. But it's not something that, it's done too frequently in mosaic, and it's done for floors, it's done for geometrics, it's not done so much for human or animal work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? Actually, I had a basic question, was because you did, you looked at a lot of artwork by Klimt.
Yeah.
Did he do any mosaics, or obviously?
No,
he's a painter.
he painted, and he came
You look at
fairly close.
his paint that almost looks like mosaics.
Yeah.
There's pieces of
Yeah.
glass in there.
Yeah,
We have in our house, we have a painting by a Pakistani American artist, which is remarkable for her style, which you see sometimes among painters, where they literally do small squares and connect all the squares, obviously, which is basically mosaic painting. I think Klimt did a bit of this, and so did Gaudi. So there's some tradition of doing it.
Are there any other questions? If not, we can end this now. Thank you all so much for participating, for going on. I know that several will be listening to the recording, so this is great that, and thank you so much for sharing this. This has been really, really, really interesting and really fun to watch all the artwork and all that. So,
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is going to be on October 18th, and we're going to talk about different colors that you can use in when painting your house. So that should be really interesting. So keep in touch, and we'll get
Elizabeth going to say some things.
Yeah, Elizabeth, were you going to say some things about CHRS?
Yeah, I was just going to run off a list of other upcoming events. As Christine says, there's going to be Color Harmonies, a preservation cafe on October 18th. We're actually hosts of a candidates forum for at-large city council. Every person who's going to be on the ballot has been invited, regardless of party affiliation. That's actually being organized and sponsored by the Hill Rag. And we're having a house expo on October 29th at the Eastern Market North Hall. Well, there'll be, between 20 and 30 house experts and government agencies will be there to answer your questions, and electricians, solar people, that kind of thing. And then we're going to have more November. We're going to have more walking tours in November, on the 12th and 13th. I hope people can make it to some of those events, and some of them are very easy to attend, especially the preservation cafes, which are Zoom.
Mhm. Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And also, I forgot to thank Finette, who is Jim's muse, because she was able to help facilitate a lot of this. So thank you. And with that, we will be in touch next time. Thanks for joining us.
All right.